Welcome to AHDB Agronomy Week 2020. The live stream session will start shortly. Before we begin, we wanted to remind you of a few points of housekeeping. You're all on mute, so don't worry, we can't hear you. The session is scheduled to last between 1 and 1.5 hours, including questions. We want this session to be as interactive as possible, so please post your questions throughout the session using the live Q&A function in the Agronomy Week platform below. We're recording this session, so if you miss anything or would like to watch it again, it will be available on the AHDB YouTube channel and AHDB website. You can also come back and watch the recordings on the Agronomy Week platform for 3 months. At the end of the session, we'll provide you with unique BASIS and NROSO codes. Don't forget to complete the BASIS and NROSO forms using the relevant tabs on the platform. You have 2 weeks after the live session to register for your points. Join in the conversation online. Follow AHDB_cereals and AHDB_potatoes on Twitter and use the hashtag AgronomyWeek. If you have any issues with the conference platform, there are digital event FAQs in the menu on the left-hand side. You can use the Help tab to contact the team if you experience any technical problems during the week. We hope that you enjoy Agronomy Week 2020. Thanks for joining us. Your session will now start.
Good morning and a warm welcome to everyone on the last day of Agronomy Week. Thank you all for tuning in. It's been such a busy week packed with speakers and webinars. I hope you've all enjoyed the discussion so far and continue to for the next hour and a half or so. My name's Natalie Gilbert and I'm the Knowledge Transfer Officer for the Cereals and Oilseeds team. Today we'll be providing an overview of the soils research funded by AHDB and introduce the scorecard approach to measure and monitor soil health. Now a big welcome to our speakers. First, we have Amanda Bennett, Resource Management Scientist in the Environment team at AHDB. Amanda is responsible for a portfolio of research projects on soil management, cover crops, soil biology and soil health. Also welcome to Fiona Geary, who sits within my team as Knowledge Transfer Manager. Fiona works with farmers, our research team and the industry to facilitate the link between research and on-farm activity to address technical challenges. A couple of housekeeping points. Please do send your questions in through the platform. We'll have plenty of chances to read these out to our presenters throughout the session. We'll also be using polls during our quiz later on, so we're hoping for quite a nice interactive session. You'll be prompted to answer these at the relevant time. Please do log in via the link below. As said before, NROSO points and BASIS points are available to collect for attending this session. The codes will be shown at the end, so I'm hoping we'll still have your attention by then. So without further ado, we'll start by introducing the soils research. So over to you, Amanda.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Natalie. I hope everyone can see the screen. So for the first part of the session this morning, I'm going to be providing an overview of the research and knowledge exchange activity that AHDB funds on soils. There are 2 large partnerships, which I will briefly discuss, the Rotations Partnership and the Soil Biology and Soil Health Partnership. But just before that, I just want to flag up to you that all of the soils information and resources that AHDB has on soils can be accessed via the Great Soils website. And that includes things on organic matter, on cover crops, on cultivations, precision farming, and a wide variety of topics relevant to soil management. So please do go and have a look at that. So for the first few slides, I just want to talk about the Rotations Partnership. Clearly, everybody understands that crop rotation is a good thing. It can break the life cycles of various pests and pathogens and weeds. But it's not just about a cropping sequence. It's also about those periods between the cash crops, whether there are organic materials applied, whether there are cover crops grown, whether the soil is left bare or is in stubble. And also looking at the cultivations as well ahead of each of the crops that are going in. So the Rotations Partnership is a 5-year programme of work that is funded by AHDB to really address this question, looking at how do we manage effective rotations, and particularly where potatoes are grown. It started in 2016 and will run to into 2021. So we've got time still on the researched side of this partnership. It's led by Mark Allison at NIAB CUF, and there's a consortium of academic and industry partners that are contributing to the work programme. There are 4 main work packages within the partnership, and these are all running for the duration of the partnership, so from 2016 to 2021. I don't have time today to go into all the detail of the science and the research that's going on, but you can find out more via the Great Soils website. What I would like to do is just go through a couple of little points for each of these work packages. So if I start with the green circle, platforms to support resilient rotations. And one of the key areas of work within this work package was to get a better understanding of how growers are currently using rotations. So there was a grower survey, and a number of farms and fields has provided information around how their rotations were being used. So what crops were grown, the interval between the crops, whether it was, as I said before, bare stubble or cover crops or organic amendments being applied. And all of this data is being gathered together and analysed, as well as the yield data from the crop, to really get a better understanding of what the current practice is in the UK around rotations and what makes a more resilient rotation. The blue circle is another work package looking at the applications of new technologies to enhance rotations. Just to flag up that there was a webinar recently on this, on the work that's been going on in this work package. I would really recommend that you access that via the events site, the events archive at AHDB. It's a really good overview of some of the technologies that are coming along to help understand soil structure and organic matter. So things like EMI scanning and various types of imaging, and also yield mapping to define soil management zones. So I really recommend, if you want an overview of the work that's going on there, to go and access that other webinar. The work in the work package that's in the red circle on the right is largely being delivered through a PhD project, and it is looking at crop physiology and understanding the uptake of water to the potato crop. So that PhD is also finishing next year, so there's a bit of time left on that research as well. The final work package, I've got a couple more slides on, enhancing rotational productivity and resilience. So this is really the idea that it's not just a crop sequence, but that you can incorporate other interventions, if you like, in between the crops to try and make that improve the yield, but also to help improve soils. Within this work package, there have been a series of on-farm trials and experiments. I think there have been over 80 since the partnership started. The map on the right just shows an example of where they're located in the UK. So you can see there's quite a range of areas and regions that have been covered. Many of the trials are looking at cover crops or the use of organic matter inputs. So that's a range of different composts and manures that are being applied in trials to see the effects of that on the following crop. There have also been experiments on cultivations and a wheel track experiment as well. But for the rest of this session, I just want to focus a little bit on the work on the cover crops and the organic materials. So this is data that has been provided by Mark Allison. It is looking at the effect of cover crops on the yield of the following potato crop over the number of trials that have been run over the last 3 or 4 years. So along the y-axis is the total yield of the potato, and on the x-axis are the individual trials that are ranked. And I'll come back to that. So a number of different trials along the bottom, and then on the right-hand side, the average for 2017, 2018, 19, and 20, and then the overall mean for all of the trials that were investigating the impact of cover crops. So these have been ranked left to right according to the effect of the cover crop compared to the control plots of the trial. So on the ones on the furthest on the left have actually found a negative impact, where the effect of the cover crop has reduced the yield of the potato crop in that trial at that site. Now, obviously, as you go across the graph, you can see that there are more cases where the cover crop has had a positive impact on the yield of the potato crop. And if you look at the mean data on the far right, you can see that that is the case across the trials in total. So this is very top level in terms of just with or without the cover crop and the impact that that has had on the potato yield. And these data are being analysed further to get a better understanding of those soil type differences and the different cover crops that have been grown, for example, and that will be coming out in the final reporting of the project. So similarly, a number of trials have looked at the effect of organic materials on the yield of the following potato crop. So again, the same format with yield on the y-axis, range of trials along the x-axis, and here in red, the effect of those organic amendments on the yield of the potato crop. Again, ranked from left to right with a negative effect on the left, but you can see that there have been, again, more incidences where the organic amendment has increased the yield of the following potato crop. Overall, this has been less of a positive effect if you look at the mean compared to the cover crops. So again, as a top line message, it would seem that cover crops have a very much good benefit on the yield of potato crops on average, and organic amendments also have a positive effect, but less so than the cover crops. Again, this is not differentiating between the types of organic materials that have been applied, and there is further analysis ongoing to better understand that data and pull apart those nuances of the different trials. One other thing that I wanted to flag up for the Rotations Partnership is a tool that's being developed to look at soil compaction. Obviously, soil compaction is an issue in terms of not impeding the growth of plant roots, and is also a risk for surface runoff and other environmental impacts as well. So ideally, we would like to avoid soil compaction rather than try to rectify it. And Tyrannomo is a model that is being used to predict the risk of soil compaction due to agricultural field traffic. This is something that is already in use in Europe, and the project team for the Rotations Partnership are developing it and improving the information relevant to the UK soil types, and that can be accessed via the tyrannomo.uk website. So that is something that's worth looking out for in the future. Okay, very brief overview of the Rotations Partnership there. As I couldn't go into too much detail. What you can see is the work in that partnership is looking at how we can improve not only crop productivity, but also soils, and what the benefits of these interventions are. The second partnership is looking at soil biology and soil health, and really trying to get a handle on how we measure and monitor soil health, really to see if the interventions that have been put into place are what impact they are having on soil condition. So the Soil Biology and Soil Health Partnership is another 5-year partnership that is funded by AHDB and co-funded by the British Beet Research Organisation, BBRO. Again, a large consortium of academic and industry partners. This is led by Elizabeth Stockdale at NIAB. Again, a huge number of projects, which I unfortunately don't have time to go into all the detail, but the focus for today is going to be on the scorecard. And this is one of the main aims of this partnership, is to develop and validate indicators of soil health. So I'm sure everybody is quite aware now that the 3 components of soil, the chemistry, the physics, the biology, need to work together to create a healthy soil. Now, we have in the past had quite a lot of information about the chemistry of soil in terms of nutrient status and pH balance, and also looking at the physical structure of soil and being able to look at things like compaction. The biology of soil is less well understood, and part of the work of the partnership is looking to increase our understanding of soil biology and agricultural systems. The idea of the indicators is that a soil sample will be taken and that there will be a range of indicators covering the chemistry, physics and biology, and they will all be assessed at the same time in the same place. So at the start of the programme, there were a number of indicators that were selected for use and to be researched and validated through a series of trials. The physical indicators were the visual evaluation of soil structure, penetrometer resistance and bulk density. The chemical indicators, pH, routine nutrient analysis, soil organic matter using the loss on ignition method, total nitrogen, and potentially mineralizable nitrogen. And a range of biological measures are also being validated, including earthworms, mesofauna, nematodes, and then elements or indicators relating to the microbial biomass and microbial activity through respiration. As well as these indicators, there is another piece of work that is looking at the DNA measures of soil health. So looking at detecting soil-borne plant pathogens and also getting a better understanding of microbial communities in the soil, and then relating that back to how all these other indicators are being brought together. That range of indicators on the previous slide is being assessed at a range of different long-term experimental sites. These are sites that have been in place for a number of years with various different treatments. At each site, there are a range of treatments and control plots as well. And these are being used to look at the drivers for soil biology. So we have 3 sites where we have different organic materials being added to the soil, and these are ones that will feed the soil biology. We have 2 sites that are looking at changing the physical architecture of the soil or the water relations in terms of tillage and drainage. And then site that is looking at how the chemical environment of the soil in terms of where the plant roots and the biology interact. So looking at crop rotation, fertilizer and pH. So at all of these sites, a number of assessments are being made over the years, looking at all those different indicators and how they can be brought together. In parallel to the research work, we have another project that is looking at on-farm soil health assessment. So this is covering a different range of regions around the UK, and Elizabeth Stockdale is working with different farmer groups in these regions, and also covering a wider range of growing systems and farming systems, so including grazing and root veg, for example, root crops, field veg. So for the farmer groups that are testing and validating the scorecard indicators, it wasn't possible to go with everything because a lot of these indicators don't have a framework for interpretation yet. So they are being researched, but they aren't ready to roll out on farm as an immediately practical measure. So for the farm groups, a subset of the indicators was chosen where we had sufficient information to look at understanding what a good value was, or whether those benchmark values to understand whether it could be improved or not. So that was the visual evaluation of soil structure, pH, routine nutrient analysis, soil organic matter, and an earthworm count. So these are the basic measures that we started out in the programme. Now, over time, we have brought in additional measures, and this year the farmers are also looking at potentially mineralisable nitrogen and the respiration test. Excuse me. So here at last, you get to see what a scorecard actually looks like. So this is just an example that you will see several other examples during the course of today's session. So I just want to spend a bit of time explaining what it means really. So on the first column, the attributes are the indicators. These are the things that have been measured and assessed either in the field or have been sent off to a lab for assessment. And then the idea is that the values the results that come back from the soil analysis are, if they're within an expected range for that soil type and rainfall region, for example, based on data we have either published in the literature or that's being developed through this program, if it's within that expected range, it flags up green. So there's no action needed. It means you're on track and everything's good to go. Keep doing what you're doing. If it flags amber, that means the result is marginal. It's not quite. It's either just outside the threshold, too low or too high, And it means that really it's something that should be monitored, perhaps more frequently than it has been in the past, to see what improvements can be made. And if it flags red, it means it's quite far out of those range of values and could be an issue for either crop production or for the environment. And really that means it's something that needs to be investigated. For the scorecard approach, the idea is that these assessments will be made in the same place and then on a rotational basis. So at the next point in the rotation, maybe 4 or 5 years later, go back to the same place and take those assessments again, and then to see whether the management approach that's been used in those intervening years has maintained those indicators as a good level, or whether there has been any improvement through those management actions that have been taken. So the idea really is that it's the same site gets assessed repeatedly over time. It's not really to be able to compare with your neighbour to say, I've got this, you've got that, except for the fact it's a really good conversation starter and a really good discussion item. So for this example that I have on screen now, this was taken from these 3 farms were on a similar soil type and in a similar rainfall region. So you would expect the values for those indicators to be the same thresholds. So in that case, in that situation, it might be that the farmer from farm 2 or 3 can see that farm 1 has got a higher percentage of soil organic matter. And they will say, oh, what have you done? How have you achieved that? Because we have the potential to achieve that as well. That doesn't mean that the solution for farm 1 is the same solution that farm 2 and 3 will choose, because really it's about site-specific circumstances, and it has to fit in with that farm business about the management approach that gets chosen, and there are a range of options available. Okay, so I think I'm going to, we'll come back to any other discussions on scorecards as we go through, because there are a number of other examples coming up. So I said that there are, it's not really a single solution for improving soil health, and that really it needs to be up to the individual site as to what would be appropriate for that. But there are general principles around improving soil health, and that can be through increasing organic matter inputs, whether that's bringing in various materials onto farm or even leaving crop residues, for example. Increasing rotation, length and diversity, and that diversity could be bringing in cover crops, or it could be, if you wanted to incorporate livestock in the rotation, bringing in a grass ley, for example. And reducing tillage intensity where possible, and it is where possible, because some crops do require more intensive tillage than others, but it might be that the intensity is reduced rotationally, so that ploughing, instead of occurring every year, is occurring every several years instead, or it might be that the actual intensity is completely changed in terms of moving from ploughing to reduced or minimum tillage. So a number of different options, no one size fits all, but so we can talk about that a little bit later in the discussion session. And I think just one final thing to say, I mentioned at the beginning that all our information on soils is available on the Great Soils website, so please do go and have a look at that. And I hand back to Natalie now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. It's a really fantastic insight into some of the great work you're doing within research. I've just got a couple of quick questions for you before we go to Fiona. Do you have a preliminary view on the most resilient rotation?
That's a good question. I don't know that we have a direct answer for that to be prescriptive, because it will depend, as I say, on things like the soil type and the rainfall region, and so I think a resilient rotation is one that would have a resilient soil at the end of the day. So anything you can do to help improve soil organic matter, for example, by either incorporating organic amendments at some point in the rotation, or those cover crops that can be brought in, improving that soil structure and the resilience the soil to extremes of weather will provide for a good resilient rotation.
Thank you. And just another quick one. We've got more questions that we'll kind of go to towards the end in the discussion. How were the threshold values on the scorecard? How were they agreed?
Okay, so a range of approaches, to be honest. So the threshold values for some of those indicators are already known and have been well established in industry for a long time. So, for example, things like nutrient values, the Nutrient Management Guide RB209, we know what those are for crop production. And so a number of the thresholds were already established in terms of being able to use that traffic light system. It's also based on the work of a SARIC-funded project, which took place previously, where a number of benchmarks were actually agreed through that project, including pH, the visual evaluation of soil structure, and those nutrient values. So they were already in existence and had been agreed through previous research. For some of the other indicators, so even for soil organic matter, for example, there have been a number of research projects and reviews about that. And based on that existing literature and that research, the project team came up with what seemed to be an agreed set of thresholds. Again, for soil organic matter, it will depend on the soil type and the rainfall region and the cropping system, really. So there's slightly different thresholds for each of those scenarios. And these are what's being tested in the research now. So at the end of the research, it might confirm that these are acceptable as threshold values, or they might be tweaked slightly. Now, for some other threshold values, we're basing it on data that has come from the United States, for example, and it's not necessarily relevant to the UK soil types and conditions. So there, again, additional research has been gathering data from the UK to be able to put some values around what's expected in our soil types and our climates, and that's being assessed through the duration of the partnership. And so at the end of the project, we hope to have a bit more firm information on some of those thresholds to add to that.
Great, perfect, thank you. And I guess that kind of leads us nicely onto Fiona, who'll be introducing this how to use the soil health scorecards on farm. So thank you, and over to you, Fiona.
Thank you. So I'm going to pick up on how the scorecards are being used as a practical measure to inform soil management on some of the farms in the Oilseeds Farm Excellence Network, and it will be picking up on some of the things that Amanda has already discussed. So David and Amber gave you an introduction to the Potatoes Farm Excellence Network on Wednesday morning. If you missed that session, you can catch up on the platform. So just an introduction to the Oilseeds Network. This is made up of 20 monitor farms and 3 strategic cereal farms spread across the UK, as you can see on the map here. The difference between monitor farms and strategic farms is that monitor farms are farmer-led, farmer-driven, and they focus on business, technical and personal development to encourage and facilitate business improvement. And this is a 3-year programme, whereas the strategic farms are a 6-year project, and they are focused on putting research into practice. So we have structured trials on farm, and they may be short-term or long-term trials on a field or on a farm scale, depending on the particular trial and the farm in question. So on farm last autumn, we offered the scorecards to our new cohort of monitor farmers, and 7 of those monitor farms each had 6 fields assessed using the scorecard. Now, the level of soil assessments done on those farms previously varied. Some had really extensive soil testing done, some had a little less, some had it done fairly recently, and some had not done any soil testing for a number of years. But no matter how recent or how extensive the previous soil assessments had been, every single monitor farmer who had the scorecard presented to them noticed something different. In some cases, it was new data. They hadn't realised that the numbers looked like that, in a good or a bad way. And For others, it was the visual element that highlighted some things that they wouldn't have noticed before. Having the field results side by side can really make them draw conclusions that they hadn't necessarily done before. So one of the benefits of the Farm Excellence Network, which there are many, is that it provides a feedback loop into the research. So we asked all of the Monitor Farm hosts how they found the scorecard and if it's something that they would use and like to use again. And the feedback was really positive. None of the Monitor Farm hosts said that they would like to change any of the parameters, which I think really highlights the importance of having such a large consortium that has been involved in the project. We've got industry members, research, farmers who have all been involved in deciding which parameters are used, and so that we can make sure that the research is useful in a practical way and in a real business. And by far the visual element of the scorecard was the thing that most of the Monitor farmers appreciated and found different to normal soil testing that they've had done. I'm just going to go through a couple of examples of scorecards that we've had from last year. So first we've got this, which is on the Norfolk-Suffolk border, and it's got a serial rotation on sandy loam to heavy clay loam, and they operate mainly a minimum tillage approach. However, they do assess all of the fields before they cultivate, just to assess the need of that field. So it's not a blanket approach at all. So the thing that this particular Monitor Farm host noticed was the earthworms line. Having 3 red boxes definitely took his attention. So 3 of the fields required further investigation for the earthworm numbers. So as the scorecard has suggested, he went out with a spade a couple of weeks later, and the earthworms numbers were continuing to improve. So the important thing to note here is to take the scorecard in context. So unlike the long-term experimental sites that Amanda had spoken about earlier, these samples were taken on one day. So the sample was actually taken at the start of a wet period after a long dry spell. So this may have had an influence on the earthworm numbers, which Richard did seem to notice later on as things wetted up a little bit more. He got better earthworm numbers on those particular fields. And he said it was starting to confirm some things that he'd seen elsewhere. So where they'd applied organic matter, the earthworm numbers were better. So I think that's something that he will look to do more in the future, is look at his organic matter and organic amendments. So if we move over to Wales, so for the Pembrokeshire Monitor Farm, again, he had 3 fields showing red for earthworms. However, this particular Monitor Farm host didn't focus on the red fields for this line. It was the green ones that took his attention. And that's because, again, the sampling was done in conditions that weren't necessarily conducive to earthworm numbers. So seeing the green numbers, even though the conditions weren't necessarily ideal for earthworms, meant that he was really encouraged by what he was doing. The next thing that took his attention was the clay content between the west field. So this field was sampled twice because of the performance of the field. So there's the poor area and the good area. And he expected the clay content of the poor area to be higher than the good. And this is because the drainage was poor. And seeing the clay content has actually made him wonder if perhaps the clay content is higher further down the soil profile for the poor field, for the poor area, or whether there's something else going on. So that's going to be a point of investigation to come. And the next field, the biggest field that took his attention was Big Croft. So Big Croft performs fairly well looking at the whole scorecard, but this field had previously been in potatoes. So the Monitor Farm host was really encouraged about the soil's ability to recover after potatoes. He's had potatoes growing on the farm for a number of years and part of a land swap agreement. But since he stopped that agreement and has been growing potatoes himself, he's been able to reduce the number of passes by half. And he has done this by preceding the potato crop with a cover crop, which Amanda was talking about with some of the research earlier. So he attributes a lot of his soil success to using cover crops. He's been using them for 5 to 6 years and has noticed that the soil on the ground is a lot easier to work than it was previously. So he's really encouraged by this. He's also adds poultry litter and farmyard manure from his own animals. So he's very keen on improving his soil organic matter and soil profile by doing everything that he can, to a point where the cover crop he treats as important as his other cash crops. So now if we move over to the East Midlands, here we've got the Vale of Belvoir, and it's another farm where they are trying to reduce the cultivation. So they stopped ploughing 20 years ago and have been using a minimum tillage approach ever since. The biggest point for this particular host was these two fields here. So we've got footpath and home house, and they have a similar soil type. They have had similar cropping. They've performed in a very similar way historically. So he wondered why there were, so different results. There's a lot more amber and red in home house than there is in footpath. However, the only difference between these two fields is that home house was ploughed for the first time in 20 years to try and combat a weed problem. So his first reaction was to think that perhaps the plough had caused these changes, caused the amber and red results to show, but because he hadn't done previous testing, he isn't able to make that conclusion. But if he wanted to, he could look into trials to see if ploughing does have an effect, although I think he would rather redo the soil scorecard at a later date to see if he's actually been able to improve those numbers rather than to see if the plough is what caused it. That's a very quick overview of a couple of the scorecards from last year. And having spoken to all of the monitor farm hosts, although the numbers were different, there were different areas of concern or different areas that were better across the board. The take-home messages were very similar. So all of the monitor farm hosts said that they wanted to use the scorecard as part of a monitor farm discussion. And this is because they all really value the benefit that comes from the expertise from other farmers and agronomists, because there's a lot of factors that go into soil health and soil biology, soil physics and soil chemistry. So it's not just a one size fits all, like Amanda said earlier. They really want to draw on the expertise from the area and think about why certain fields performed certain ways, what's caused the red and the amber results, how can that be improved in that particular situation and scenario, but how can they take forward the green fields and those green values and try and bring up fields elsewhere on the farm. They also wanted to redo the scorecard at a later date to see whether they have made any improvements. The visual element really will allow comparison year on year for them. And going out with a spade. So the visual evaluation of soil structure and the earthworm counts can be done at any point by the farmer and their agronomist. They can go out with a spade and just have a look at what's going on as often as they need to do. So that's a brief overview of how the scorecard is being used in the monitor farms, but we also have strategic cereal farms as part of the network, and the scorecard is also used on the strategic farms. So the first year of the strategic farm is normally a baselining year. This is to gather metrics at the start of the programme, which are then re-looked at later on, normally in year 3 and year 6, if there have been any changes throughout the strategic farm project. So the scorecard is used for the soil biology, chemistry and physics baselining for all of the strategic farms, and that is then repeated again later on. The scorecard values can actually inform some of the trials. It may be that we've noticed something in some of the fields that we could look at, if there's anything consistently an issue or consistent or variation within a field, and the in-field variation can actually be factored then into trial design so that we can take that into account. And if a trial needs soil data to inform the outcomes, the scorecard will be repeated on a trial by trial basis. So this year, the Strategic Cereal Farm Scotland has started, and the scorecard will be used to do the soil baselining. And this scorecard and the soil baselining is actually going to be used in compare against the other baselining, so soil, plant health and pests, pollinators and natural enemies, to see if there is any correlation between poor areas in the soil and plant health and the wider environment. And we've also got the new cohorts of monitor farms, and they are going to have the soil health scorecard done. Some assessments have already been done, the last few are being done as we speak. They're each going to have 6 fields assessed, and that will then feed into monitor farm discussions, webinars, and we'll be able to follow those fields throughout the season with video updates and case studies as well to see how those fields perform. And in coming years, we can see if there has been any remedial action taken. And the best place to find all of this information is the Farm Excellence tab on the AHDB website. So on screen right now is your local knowledge exchange manager. So there is a knowledge exchange manager for cereals and oilseeds and potatoes for every region. And I would really encourage you to get in contact with them and to get involved with the Farm Excellence Network, be that in person or online for the moment. The discussions that are had can be very, very beneficial to both your career, and your expertise will definitely be very beneficial to those discussions, especially with the strategic farms being drivers of innovation. This will be something that will play a part in the advice that you're giving to your clients in such a changing environment, both politically and in the environment. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand back over to Natalie for any questions.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I think it's such a useful tool for agronomists to know about, and it's really great to have a sort of overview of exactly how it works. Just a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So different soil types can be found in the same field. How do you go about choosing where to sample?
I think a lot of the sampling will be depending on the performance. So the farmers, they may choose to sample all of the different soil types, but if they notice, it may, cropping is different, that's probably something they want to investigate. It depends how they manage the fields themselves.
Perfect. And can anyone do the scorecard? Who's it available for?
Yeah, anyone can do the scorecard. Some assessments may need to go to a lab, but all of the threshold values for green, amber and red ratings can be found on the AHDB website, and that's actually in the Project 2 report of the Soil Biology and Soil Health project. So this, some of the values are being reviewed, so just you take that with caution and keep looking back at what the latest is for that. But then things like VES and earthworm counts can be done by anybody at any time. You can just go out with a spade. Farmer and new agronomist can go out together and just go and have a look at what's going on.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I think we're going back to Amanda now, who's going to be leading on the quiz section of this session.
The quiz.
So hopefully we do have some listeners that are ready to start answering some more technical questions.
Excellent. So I think Heather is doing the slides for this. So thank you very much. Yes, so you've heard a little bit about the scorecard approach now, and obviously some of the research that's going on and some of the initial practical application that we have on the monitor farms. So this little session is going to be a bit more interactive, a bit more of a discussion. So please do send in your questions as well, but there will be some polls, so you can get ready to answer some questions there. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I'm going back to something that was said earlier, that all soils are different, and this is a really important foundation piece of information to interpret any scorecard that you do. It's not just the soil type, it's the management history, it is the site conditions, the cultivations, and all of those external inputs that have had effect over the years on that soil and that site. I always find it really fascinating to go and look at different soil profiles in a soil pit, and just the range of sites that you see that are going on below ground. Definitely worth, anytime there's a soil pit, go and have a look down there. But yes, so all soils are different, so there isn't a single soil management approach that can be used. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've spoken about the physical, biological and chemical attributes of soil. So in the physical side, the soil texture, it's an inherent property. You can't really change the soil texture, and it's what you're given to work with. So understanding that is the first important bit. But more or less anything else can be influenced by management. So you can change the structure of your soil, you can install drainage, you can improve drainage. Understanding the biology, you can feed the soil biology by amendments. Some of the other microorganisms that interact with plant roots directly, such as mycorrhizal fungi, can be influenced. There was one of the PhD showcases earlier in the week was about how cover crops can influence mycorrhizal populations going forward to the next cash crop. So you can implement different management approaches to influence all the biology of the soil as well. And then the chemistry, all the nutrient status and the pH, again, these are things that can be adjusted and amended with management practices. So whilst we have these three elements to work with, physics, chemistry and biology, there really are options in terms of what a farmer or land manager can do to improve them. Okay, next slide, please. So hopefully everybody has at least seen, if not completely familiar with the details of the soil textures triangle. This is for mineral soils in the UK, and essentially it's a way to classify them according to their percentage clay, silt and sand. And that then divides them up into these various soil textures, but also into light, medium and heavy soils. And just understanding the different properties of those soil groups is again something really useful to be able to interpret the findings of the soil health scorecard. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a flow chart if you're interested in hand texturing soils. So that is available. Here we have a copy. The Principles of Soil Management gives you this flow chart in it. I think that document is available on the link. Labs can do an analysis of the soil texture, and most farmers will know their soil types. I'm sure Fiona will agree from the monitor farmers, they know which areas of the field or which soil types. But it is always useful to have a go at hand texturing just to get a feel for the soil yourself. So next slide, please. So that's what we're going to do now. Now, it's a little bit unfair because if this was a face-to-face event, we would have some soils available for you to actually get to grips with. But unfortunately, we don't have them to hand, as it were. So we're going to have a few polls now to see whether you can judge them based on sight alone. So we'll have our first poll, please. So if you could vote on what you think that soil texture could be based on the three visual elements provided.
Is there anything, Amanda, that farmers or agronomists could take out into the farm into the field to help them make these decisions?
In terms of understanding the soil type?
Yeah.
Do you mean to do a soil texturing? Yeah, if you could easily follow the guide in the Principles of Soil Management guide. It's a fairly straightforward flow chart. Literally, what does the soil feel like? Does it stain your fingers? Can it be rolled into a ball? So yeah, there's various options. Sandy loam. Well, that's very good. So that is indeed a sandy loam soil. Well done for those of you who voted for that. It's not the easiest thing to do on a visual, just on a visual thing, but we do have a couple more to get you thinking. So if we could have the next poll. Oh, nobody wants to vote now. Everyone's nervous. This is only for fun, by the way. This is not going to be. This is not going to be allocated to any points or anything. It's not. It's not a quiz for points. A sandy clay loam, very good. I'm pleased to see that the majority are getting it. Oh, people are changing their minds. Again, not easy to visualize just based on that, but that one is a sandy clay loam. It's a medium soil texture, a slightly higher clay content than the one on the previous slide. So let's have the final one and see. I think you can see here it's visibly different.
See if everyone got 100%.
There we go. A clay. Oh, I'm pleased to see everybody had clay in the answer on that one. So yes, this one is a clay soil. I can guarantee it did feel incredibly sticky when it was wetted up, and very much like plasticine. But yes, so very difficult to do. Just looking at the pictures, but when you get your hand in and get to feel the different textures, that's I would definitely encourage you to go and have a go and just see what the difference is. If you can find some different soil textures to feel the difference, particularly if you're in a sandy soil and a clay soil, you can definitely feel the different textures. So next slide, please. Okay, so this was just a sort of a pause, just to say why it's important to understand that soil type. So really thinking about the properties of the soil. So a sandy soil is able to drain more easily than a clay soil, which will hold on to water much more effectively. Well, it depends, it could get waterlogged, but it's just a difference in those inherent properties. A clay soil has got a higher cation exchange capacity, can hold on to nutrients more than a sandy soil, and organic matter as well, actually. So when we're talking about, for example, doing the scorecard and what the threshold values and those traffic lights are for sandy soils and clay soils, there are actually different thresholds. So in terms of understanding and interpreting whether that's an amber or a green, you might have the same value, numerical value of soil organic matter, but whether it's good or not will depend on sort of understanding that soil type. Fiona, I was just going to ask you, in the scorecards that you showed before, there was quite a range of soil types on some of those farms. And did you get any feel from the farmers about how they would they do anything different? Obviously they understand their soil types in terms of what they are, but is there anything that did they comment on the soil types in their fields, for example?
Not necessarily the soil types themselves. There was one farmer who was because of the soil type and the fact that he can't do anything about that, he was kind of wondering what elements he could change and what are the opportunities, because there are inherent things about the soil that he can't do very much about. But having spoken to a couple of them, I had noticed that the performance of the soils was different. So, for example, one of the farmers had said that they used cover crops and that they'd use a catch crop, and that the soil structure underneath was far better than anywhere else. But then another grower had a cover crop and had noticed there was actually more compaction under the cover crop. So I mean, that may be a soil type thing. He had direct tilled the cover crop, so he wasn't sure, and was then going to graze it. He was very careful not to poach the land with the sheep for grazing the cover crop. So he was just going to wait and see if the roots were able to alleviate any of the compaction potentially caused by drilling it. But perhaps he needs to look at his cultivation. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think it does come down to those what your management options are. I know certainly we had one of our research projects that was looking at cover crops as well, and the timing of destruction of cover crops. And for one of the farmers that was involved with that, when it was on a heavy soil, and when the cover crop was destroyed later, the soil had stayed too wet because obviously it was already holding on to a lot of moisture, being a heavy soil type, and then the additional the biomass of the cover crop being on the surface was not allowing it, the soil to dry out as effectively. So these management decisions can be influenced by the soil type that's there as well.
And that kind of leads me to a question to you, Amanda. What are the management considerations between the three types of soil that we just had on screen?
I'm going to refer to my Principles of Soil Management guide. So there is actually something in here that discusses the different soil types, but at a top level. So a sandy, medium, and a heavy soil, and gives sort of tips that would be useful for those soils. So whether it's sort of for all of them, add organic matter, regularly to improve that. But it's around the potential to move to maybe lay arable rotations, or how you actually look at things like your phosphorus management, for example. So if you've got soils that are holding on to nutrients a lot, you need to consider that. Whereas if in a sandy soil where the capacity to hold on to the nutrients is less, then you would need to do little and often, rather than adjusting strategy according to soil type. But there are some tips in the Principles of Soil Management guide.
That's the go-to.
Okay, shall we move?
Yeah, perfect.
That is the go-to.
The next slide.
Yeah. Let's go on. Okay, so it just says local knowledge, get the facts. This is just a reminder, really, that the scorecard, just seeing it on paper is, as a series of numbers, doesn't help with the interpretation necessarily. If you've got a lot of experience, you can deduce things from it potentially, but really that local knowledge is key, and that involves a conversation with the farmer and the land manager to know, as I said before, what the management history is and what the what the inputs have been over the years. Fiona referred to one of the monitor farmers where they had a long time of no-till, and then in one field they had ploughed. And actually, is that something that has adjusted those categories on the scorecard? Well, actually, you need to go again over time to see. But understanding the site's history and that all the inputs that have come into it are really important, because just turning up and looking at a situation in a field doesn't necessarily give you that context. So really, it is about having the conversation and the interpretation, getting the context to interpret it. Okay, next slide, please. So this is an example of a scorecard from one of our long-term experimental sites at Gleethorpe. So here we have got a number of different organic materials that have been applied over several years, compared to a control plot where it's only had mineral fertilizers. And as you can see, for the most part, the organic materials have increased the soil organic matter level in the soil. They have improved the nutrient indices and the values there. The VEST score has improved as well, gone from amber to green across the treatments. And then you look at the earthworms and you think, oh, what's going on there? And if you had only gone to do an earthworm count, you would perhaps walk away and think, these organic materials are not adding any benefit to my soil. So this is bringing in the holistic approach around why it's good to look at all these other indicators as well, and not just look at one thing in isolation. This is coming back to the local knowledge. So at this site, again, the interpretation around the scorecard, Gleethorpe is a really light textured soil. And because of that, there has been generally a lower organic matter level in the soil, and the earthworms just haven't really had much to live off, as it were. And also the fact that the cultivation at this site has been plough-based, and obviously that can disturb the biological habitats. So again, if you're looking just at something like cold on paper, as it were, you do need to understand that context around why some of these things might be occurring. And in this case, the fact that the earthworms are flagging red, well, actually the interpretation of that is we know there aren't really any earthworms at this site, and they aren't going to spontaneously emerge without having a chance to move into the fields, maybe from the boundaries, or to allow those populations to increase. So just again an example of where you need to know a bit more than just what's on the paper with the results. So if we have the next slide, please. I think it's a poll coming up next. Okay, so this is another one of our long-term sites. Again, looking at different organic materials over a number of years compared to a control plot which has just had mineral fertilizers. Again, you can see the organic materials have generally had a good increase compared to the control, moving things into the green. But the question is, why has the phosphorus flagged red on the farmyard manure treatment?
Looking at the nutrients here, one of the farmers that I spoke to, he had all green for his PK MD, but he'd previously had some nutrient assessments done, and from there did variable rate. So now, because everything looks uniform, he wants to use Farm Bench to look at whether it's still economically viable for him to be using variable rate applications. But again, that shows that perhaps a variable rate was what his farm needed for a time to bring everything up to a level, and then perhaps now he's brought the index up enough that he'll be able to just go uniform and maybe save a little.
Yeah, that's definitely a good comment. Very good. Okay, let's have a look at the answers. So most respondents have said it's a risk to environment, but also various other options have been chosen there as well. So in this case, yes, it is answer B. It is a risk to the environment. So obviously, if we have too much phosphorus, then that can potentially be lost through runoff and erosion into watercourses and decrease water quality, and obviously have that potential environmental pollution. Again, looking at why local knowledge is important here. So if you look at the control plots at this site, already the phosphorus was flagging amber, which means that it's borderline on high. So this is a site that is naturally high in phosphorus. So in terms of choosing a management approach, that needs to be taken into account. So we're thinking about nutrient management. Having that baseline, which is what the monitor farmers have been doing really, is getting those baselines established to know what to do and how, whether what you do will have an effect. Just to add the caveat that this is a long-term experimental site, and it's possibly unlikely that anyone would be applying 23 years worth of farmyard manure continually on the same plot of land. So, a pinch of salt in terms of the results. But again, just for illustrative purposes, just to show that having that site information and the context of that site before a management approach is chosen, then that's really useful to be able to interpret any subsequent results that come out on the scorecard. Okay.
Amanda, just while you were on the subject of organic matter, why were the effects of adding organic matter or the effects of cover crops investigated on the potato yields that you mentioned earlier and not on other crops? Is there other research that has looked at the cereal crops for another example?
Yes. Okay. So going back to the research then, yes, so the current rotations partnership is focusing on potatoes in the rotation. There are other crops, I think onions and other root crops, carrots and parsnips that are involved in that particular partnership. However, we did have, and they are completed projects now, we have had previous research looking at both organic matter additions and cover crops in cereals and oilseeds. Those projects have both reported. The reports are accessible via the website if anyone wants technical detail. But just a very quick overview. So looking at the organic materials, this was led by Andy Whitmore at Rothamsted, that project was essentially using the data, the back history of data from the Rothamsted trials showed that different organic materials had a beneficial effect on yield over and above the nutrient value of those materials that were added. So it was trying to understand what that yield benefit, what was bringing about that yield benefit over and above the nutrition. In terms of measuring the organic matter in the soil, it's very difficult to get. It takes a long time to get an increase in that numerical value of that measurement of soil organic matter. But that research did show that there were other benefits that could be seen earlier on, before that increase in the soil organic matter content was able to be sort of recorded as being significantly different. So we do have information on that for cereals. So organic matter does improve cereal yields. In terms of the cover crops, that was slightly different. So we had a project that was looking at cover crops ahead of spring barley, and we had a range of experimental trials. This is led by Anne Bogle at ADAS, and also on-farm trials as well. And there, the overarching message was that after a single season of cover crops, there wasn't necessarily an increased yield for the following cereal crops or the following winter crop that followed that spring crop. So in terms of the benefit of the cover crops, these needed to be used more than just once, essentially, to get the benefit. And I think, Fiona, you gave an example in the Monitor Farm as well, where somebody had repeatedly used cover crops and had found the benefit. From our research trial, it was after a single season of cover crops, that yield benefit is not seen in cereal crops necessarily. In some cases it might be, but it's not always the case. And the economic benefit is not always, doesn't always stack up after a year. But obviously a longer term approach will have the benefit. And I guess this is part of that wider discussion around what makes an effective rotation. If you are going to use cover crops, at what point in the rotation is it of greatest benefit? Obviously we've seen some results where it improves the potato yield, so maybe that's the point you want to put in the cover crops ahead of the potatoes, and there may be residual effects that go on over time for the other crops in the rotation as well. But those research reports are available if anyone wants to go back and look at those.
One of our monitor farmers had said that because he's trying to use a lot of he's trying to improve the soil, so he's using organic matter, he's using cover crops. He actually plans his rotation so much further in advance now, so that he can plan in those organic amendments and cover crops, and he's just got a much further, in advance view on what he's going to do, so that he can factor in all of those different elements so that they don't have an impact on any other crops in the rotation.
Yeah, definitely. It's a bit of a mindset as well, that long-term planning does have its benefits overall. Okay, should we move on? I'm aware of the time. Should we move on to the next session? Okay, so I was just going to talk a bit about soil biology. Soil biology is what drives the functions in soil, and cannot be underestimated, really. So all the decomposition and nutrient cycling, improving drainage, helping potentially create suppressive soils for plant disease. All of this is driven by soil biology. The pictures here on the left, you can probably just about make out an earthworm in amidst all the casts there. And on the right, these are mesofauna. So these are springtails and mites that live in the soil, feed off organic materials and so on, and help with nutrient cycling. That's a view down a microscope. So that is a key element of what's driving the functioning in soil, but not very often seen. So if we can have the next slide. Okay, so this is a view down a microscope, and there we go. This is the question: how many creatures can you see moving around in the soil particles there.
I hope our viewers are wearing some glasses today.
Try and focus in. So we'll have a random guesstimate as to how many mesofauna you saw moving around in that down that microscope view. Is anyone answering? Everyone's gone, what?
They don't want to get it wrong.
Ooh, interesting. So very much a range of options there. Oh, people are changing their minds. Okay, well, to be honest, I saw 7, so that was my opinion on that one. But yes, I guess the point of doing that, just a little bit of fun again, is something that we don't often see. And actually, that is the key point about this soil biology, is that there's so much going on below ground that we just don't see. And if the mesofauna are just about visible to the naked eye if you look really closely. But obviously, we have loads of microorganisms, and you just can't see them. But they are the ones that are driving soil processes. So if we can have the next slide, please. Luckily, we can see some things. So this is why the earthworms are on the scorecard as a biological indicator. Obviously, fairly visible, fairly easy to work with in terms of being able to count them or find them in the soil at any rate without a microscope. So for the scorecard, the approach is really to just do a total count of the number of adult earthworms that are seen. So the adult earthworms have a saddle, so that's you can see that on the pictures there, different worms there. The saddle is the reproductive ring, and obviously that comes along when they are adults. So if you have a juvenile earthworm, it won't have the saddle on it. So for the scorecard, it's just a case of counting how many earthworms you can see. You can either do a total number and then do reference how many are adults. But at the moment, the indicators on the scorecards are adult earthworms in the pit. Now, having said that, we do have other information about earthworms, and you will find that the more you look, the more interesting it becomes, and that actually we have different ecological groups of earthworms, which are shown here. So they have slightly different roles in soil ecology. The first one at the top, very small earthworms, are epigeic earthworms, and they live in the sort of organic material and compost and so on the soil surface. The endogeic earthworms, the second one down, are sort of grey-green in colour, and they live below the soil, but in the topsoil, but they burrow horizontally. And then the large earthworms at the bottom are the anisic earthworms, and they create these long vertical permanent burrows through the soil. You can see on the bottom right picture there that dark line that is going down is actually we have by chance managed to cut that soil profile right through an earthworm burrow. Unfortunately for the earthworm on that occasion, but you can see that those burrows are able to allow roots to grow down them and water drainage and so on. So very, very useful. Okay, so we have another little fun quiz now. If we'd have the next slide. Oh, tiny pictures. Hopefully you can see them. So we're going to just do three polls on. I need to write down answers for this. I've realised I can't give you the answer because then it will give away the next question. So let's have a look.
Whilst we're just looking at that one, Amanda, we've got a question here. Do earthworm numbers correlate to the levels of other soil life?
So that is work that is still going on. It will depend on which group of organisms you're talking about in a way. So some of the research is showing where there is low earthworm numbers, perhaps the reason for that is there's low organic material, so there will be lower microbial activity potentially. The research trials are also looking at, we're doing quite a bit around trying to understand mesofauna, and again, we haven't got the final results yet, but the mesofauna and the earthworms, because they're feeding on similar things, although at different stages of decomposition, that they potentially might correlate. And I guess that's part of what the research is looking at is, actually are earthworms just as good an indicator of all soil life, or do we need to look at something different? So, for example, just moving away from earthworms for a second, we have seen that bacteria, for example, are very affected by pH of soil, but actually mesofauna are not. So you can have a very different answer depending on what you're assessing. So I think there will be some similarities, but it's not a direct correlation to everything in every soil type in every rotation. Sorry, I don't know if that answered the questions effectively, but it depends. It depends. Okay. Have we got answers for the epigeic earthworms? Let's have a look. Okay, I can't give you the answers, I realise. We have to go through all three of the questions, because if I tell you the answer, then... Okay, so the endogeic earthworms, these are the ones that live in the topsoil and burrow sort of horizontally along.
Are there any of the categories or the types of earthworm that you would want more, or is it kind of an equal split as long as you've got some?
I think having some is great, but obviously the more diverse the population is of any soil organism, the more benefits that will bring. So if you're doing an earthworm count and you have you're finding earthworms across the field, that's good, just in terms of numbers. If you're finding high numbers of earthworms across the field, that's great, because you'll get a lot of activity. And if you're finding high numbers of different types of earthworms, then that's the best, because then you've got all those different functions covered across the whole field. So the more diversity is the more benefits, essentially. Okay. Oh, okay, interesting.
Not giving anything away today.
I can't give it away. I'm sorry. We're going to have to move on to the next one. So anesic earthworms. These are the deep burrowers, and someone once told me that a really interesting feature of these is that they burrow down, and so they come up at night and they take organic material from the surface of the soil and they take it back down their burrow. And actually, because they're mostly down in below ground, not completely, obviously, they do come out onto the surface, but that's why they're sort of dark-headed earthworms, because it's a bit like they're protected from the sun when they come out and do that. Although most of their activity is at night. So, right. Okay, so I can now reveal the answers. So for the first one, if we just stay on this slide, because the pictures are all the same throughout. So the first one was the epigeic earthworm, and the majority of answers there thought that was earthworm 4. Now I can see why that would be the case, because obviously that is a smallish earthworm that would fit into that descriptive category, but actually the answer was that you don't know, can't tell. And the reason for that, and it possibly is because it's a very small picture, is that it's a juvenile and you can't actually see whether or not it's got a saddle. So it might be a very tiny baby anesic earthworm, and you're not able to tell. So the first one, the epigeic one, was actually we're not sure. The second group was the endogeic earthworms. They are earthworms 2 and 3, which was the majority vote on that. So grey-green in colour. They quite often curl up into a ball, like in picture 3. These worms live sort of in the surface, just in the topsoil. They don't really come out very much. So when you pick them up and get them out in the sunlight, it's a bit of a shock and they curl up in on themselves. And then, this one is an anesic earthworm. Is picture 1 is obviously a very large earthworm and fits that category. Okay, so shall we move on to the next slide? I think there's a few more bits to go. Yeah, we'll just do it very quick. Obviously, we've only got a few minutes left of this session. So again, just the role of soil biology. So earthworms are really good indicators because they respond to management approaches. They are affected by compaction, they are affected by tillage, they are affected by waterlogging, and all of these different things. So that is why they are a good indicator of what's going on in the soil. Obviously, we have a lot of research going on around trying to understand these other groups of soil organisms, and you can find out more about that. We have a fact sheet on the soil food web, which explains a bit more about mesofauna and so on as well. So I think perhaps we should move on to the next bit. Okay, sampling location. So obviously, once you decided you want to go and look at soils, and I think Fiona, you spoke a little bit earlier about where in the field to sample based on whether it's a soil type or a good or bad area of the field. It's really down to the farmer to decide where would be suitable for them to do that. But obviously, you want to be able to go back over time and look at the results from that same location. So if we could have the next slide, please. So here's a field. We want to go and do several samples in this field potentially, and we need to find a spot that we can repeatedly go back to over time. So the best way to do this is use some georeferencing software, and there are a number of different options available. But just for illustration today, I'm going to show the What 3 Words app. So if we click on to the next slide. So this is an app that has basically mapped the entire planet into grids, and each grid is about 3 meters, I think, and has a random 3 words assigned to that location. So you can go back and find that exact spot. So that exact point in the field there is Calls Cloud Slim, and that will be something you can note down so that in future years you can go back and see where that samples had come from. So if we have the next slide, please. So here's a field we went and sampled a while ago, and we noted that it was Gobbles Grows Parties was where we sampled from. So if you just click on the animation, thank you, then we can see that that's where we need to go back to in the field. And if they have the app on your phone, you can easily find that spot again. And just to say that when you're doing the find the sample location and doing the scorecard, obviously all of this additional information about where the location is and any photographic evidence. So for example, doing the VES score, take a photograph of it as well and keep that with the records, because writing down on paper that it's VES score of 3 is a bit different to having VES score of 3 and here's what it looked like as an actual image as well. So again, just collect as much data around that sampling to help with the interpretation as you go forward. Okay, we have a next slide. Okay, so we've just got a couple more slides to go and we maybe finish up with some questions. This was just really to highlight that, you know, you might walk into a field and you'll go, wow, there's obviously something gone on here, whether it's, you know, environmental pollution or poor establishment, or perhaps, you know, not draining properly. But it's not always a case of coming to a problem and thinking, oh, we've got to fix this. Obviously, you need to be able to understand what's going on in the soil. Is it a drainage issue? Is there a compaction issue? Is it something else? And I think, Fiona, you highlighted this earlier. Actually going to find out what's going on in the good fields is equally as important, because that is what you're aiming for, and actually getting that potential as to where you can get to is really important as well. So it's not just looking at where there's an obvious issue. Obviously, you need to go and find out, and you might find out that a lot of things flag up red if you do a scorecard there, or it might just be one thing flags up red and it's the VES score and it shows that there's some compaction that's impacting on establishment. But actually looking at those good scores is really, really valuable as well. Okay, should we have the last slide? A few minutes to go. Okay, so just to summarize really, in terms of using and interpreting the scorecard, it really is about knowing your soil. So that's initially what the soil texture is. What are the inherent properties to be able to understand and interpret the results from any soil analysis? Using the local knowledge to get the context of what's going on, and being able to, again, go back to the same sites to do the sampling as well. The soil health scorecard review can be used to start conversations about management approaches, and that could lead on to down any number of avenues. But it can also highlight immediately areas that are required for investigation. For example, if there is an area of compaction that needs to be addressed that season. And also can be used as a tool to measure and monitor improvements over time, and particularly where farmers are trying new different approaches to actually see, is that having the effect that is desired, or is it does something else need to be looked at? And then again, just to reiterate that there are a variety of different approaches to improve soil health, and it's not one size fits all. And the general principles are to increase diversity and add organic amendments and reduce tillage intensity where possible. But actually using the scorecard can help, again, start that conversation around which management option is best for that farm, for that site, and for that business. So I think that's the last bit of the slide, I think.
That's great. Thank you so much. And yeah, really good to have a quick run through of the subject of the scorecard and soil health. Just one really quick question to you, Amanda. Can very high soil organic matter have a negative effect on production?
Yeah, it depends what we mean by very high. So at some point, at some very, at a high point, because organic matter can also lock up nutrients as well, in that with a cation exchange capacity. So it can impact on some elements of nutrient exchange as well, and also I believe it can bind certain crop protection products as well, so that they are less effective. But it would have to be, I think, a fairly high level. And I can't give you a value because again, it would depend on the soil type. What would be value there?
That's great. Thank you so much. So I think we'll draw it to a close today. I'd like to thank Fiona and Amanda for such an interactive session. I think we've really ended the week on a high, and also congratulate both for contributing to such ambitious projects of AHDB, such as the scorecard. It's a direct result of trying to improve the viewers' customers' knowledge and resources. To the viewers, I hope you've found today's webinars informative and useful, along with all the sessions you've attended this week. Just a couple of reminders. Please do complete the session feedback form, which is found below. This is really helpful to us when planning future content. I think if we could put the slide up with the NROSO and basis points, that's great. Thank you. Apply for your points there. Something that may be of interest, our cereals team have collated a Monitor Farm Monday programme. This is to replace our usual meetings and events throughout the winter. So on the 14th of December, the webinar covers the soil health scorecard with Elizabeth Stockdale from NIAB as a speaker. To sign up, please visit our Monitor Farm Monday webpage. Huge thank you again to the speakers, Fiona and Amanda, but also to Emily Pope, Heather, Johnny and Ben for organising Agronomy Week. I'm sure you'll all agree they've done a fantastic job. If you have any questions at all or would like to contact me, I'm available on the Agronomy Week platform using the chat function. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you all have a lovely weekend.